All righty. Good afternoon. We are going to call our very first budget finance committee meeting to order as we talk about the newly developed superintendent's proposed budget. But before then, I will need to entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the January 28th meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Rice, seconded by Chair Hegarty. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The ayes have it. And Mr. Nieder, this will be, we'll be taking a deep dive into the high-level presentation that was done last week. And there, to my knowledge, will not be any proposed changes in this particular meeting. That will be in the upcoming work sessions and whatnot. So I will pass over to you, Ms. Gibbs.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Swanson. Yes, and today, it seems like a lot longer than a week ago, we presented to you the superintendent's proposed budget last Tuesday night. So, again, today's focus is primarily to give you more information and detail about the proposed repurposing of budget that you first heard about last Tuesday. And just a couple slides for context and background for both the board and the public. There have been no easy decisions for these recommendations for repurposing. And the basis that there was an underlying theme was to mitigate the impact on our core business. But that being said, when Wake County and other districts in North Carolina rank among the bottom of the country in per pupil funding, and margins have long been all but eliminated, just about any recommendations are going to have an indirect or direct impact on our mission. So again, looking back to your board retreat in December of 2024, we shared with you a preview that our estimates of additional local funding needs for 2025, 2026 in the $60 million range. That had to do with opening of new schools, 4 new schools, and some other things which I'll show on the next slide. We also shared back in December that the forecasted Wake County revenues were likely not going to be in support of that level of an increase. Now, we presented similar information at the joint boards meeting back in February that was held at Crossroads 3. And now with the new administration in Washington, we have the added layering of uncertainty about the status of our federal funding, which makes up about 8% of our total budget, just under $200 million. So for the first time in many years, the proposed budget not only includes new things, but also repurposing to be able to create funding for new local funding needs in the coming year that we do not believe additional county appropriation will be available for. And just one last thing about the federal context. Not only does Wake County Public Schools and every other LEA in the state receive federal funding directly through a flow through from DPI, Wake County government, one of our primary funding sources, and the state of North Carolina also receives significant revenue funding in support of their respective budgets. So any material changes in federal funding at either the state or the county level could have material implications for those two respective governing bodies to support us in forms of funding. As I shared with you a week ago, one thing is certain, uncertainty will prevail. I did see, I believe Senator Berger made a comment recently about looking at the types of efficiency studies and other things that are happening in Washington, perhaps at a state level. And I did see our governor also chime in, something effective, let's be careful. I agree with that, but let's do it with I think the quote was a scalpel and not a chainsaw. So we'll see where that all plays out. So the last context slide before we actually get into the realignment As I said, we've got the operating costs of 4 new schools in this coming year. We're estimating, and again, at this point, it's just an estimate or a forecast, that the state will legislate a 3% compensation increase, kind of across the board. And while the state will cover the cost of that for state-funded employees, for our locally funded employees, we've got to identify local funding to meet that need. We also looked back over the last 5 years and done looked at the average increase for health insurance and for retirement insurance, or excuse me, retirement employer contributions to get an estimate of what we will need a local fund for. Again, for state-funded employees, the state will pick up the cost for that. And we've got legislative increases in the area of pass-through charters. Anytime we get an increase in county appropriations, about 11% of that just comes right through the county, even though it's in our budget. We do not have access to those funds. Charters bill us on a monthly basis. We pay those invoices, and it flows straight through to the charters. And the last thing I'd like to mention, we have in the current year behavioral health support positions, counselors and social workers primarily, that were partially funded in the current year on the remaining ESSER funds for the first quarter of the current year. If we want to maintain those positions, we'll need to identify local funding to maintain that. And that and some other things included in that program continuity category, just under $4 million. So that gets to this assumption that the requested county appropriation increase will not be enough to meet the needs for additional local funds required, the need for repurposing existing funds, and the extremely difficult decisions. And just again, for some context, about 90% of our funding goes to schools. And as I shared, we try to be very thoughtful in mitigating the impact on our core business, which is our schools. And of these proposed repurposings, a little over 50% of it is coming out of our central operation, even though 90% of our budget is going to those schools. So I just want to share that for context. And then we're going to let each chief come up and speak to their respective areas to give you a sense of what some of these proposed repurposings and reductions would look like. And I want to clarify, in some areas, for example, contractual services reductions, we've not made final decisions. We've come up with an estimate of what we think we can do, mitigating the impact. We're still working through final decisions. And as Ms. Kempsey shared with you a week ago, I believe the budget development process is an extremely fluid process for a multiple period of months. This first one would be system-wide. We don't like it, but we put it out there. It would be for our employees that participate in our dental insurance plan. They currently pay a portion of the cost of the monthly premium, and the district picks up a portion of the cost. This proposal would have the employee, for the employee-only portion, take on that $28 a month responsibility. The district would no longer support it. We have about 16,000 employees, or 20,000 plus employees that participate. That would yield a net savings of $2.5 million. And to clarify, I don't think this came out last week, employees do have the option to cover their families as well. Under our current plan, we're not recommending any change to that plan. Employees currently pay for that additional cost of family coverage. We're not proposing any change there. And with that, I'm going to see where Dr. Gartner is and ask him if he would join us at the table.
Mr. Nader, before we move forward, are you comfortable with questions being at the end or after every chief presents?
I will defer to.
I mean, we can. I
superintendent.
think it'll be fine if you do it as each chief presents. At least that way we don't have to go all the way back to the 6th or 7th chief and try to remember, so I don't think that's right.
Sounds great. And before we kick it off to our chief of schools, could we go back to the previous slide? Is there any questions about the system-wide dental? Mr. Hershey, followed by Ms. Mahaffey.
When we do a contribution like that, are employees taxed on that?
So this would be a pre-tax deduction?
Yeah.
Because it's considered underneath the medical, so it would be taken out of their paycheck before taxes are assessed.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Ms. Mahaffey?
This is probably the piece that concerns me most, and I understand that is a large portion and only for half the year. Is it expected that this would then continue to the first part of the next academic year as well, since you generally have enrollment in November? And then
Yes.
you're talking, so this would then continue for at least the first half?
Yeah, the reason it's in the current structure, Ms. Mahaffey, is because we're on a calendar year enrollment basis, we couldn't make a disruption to it in the middle of the calendar year. And so for the calendar year of 2026, 2027, it would continue in entirety. That crosses 2 fiscal years.
Yeah. So, so we would see, again, for me, as I'm looking at this, if I were back in the classroom, I would see this as a loss of income. If I'm expected to then put up that $28 a month. And just depending on where you are in the pay scale, that hits harder, especially for our folks like our cafeteria workers. And so this is the part where I'd like to see some more options, whether it's a sliding scale, whether it is looking at some other past practices to have that coverage, because we're asking, I think it's hard to not interpret this as a loss of income. And we're entering a time that has a lot of economic uncertainty. And so $28 is going to start seeming like more as we move through this uncertainty.
And in addition to the point that you raised, I think this is also a loss for us as a recruitment for benefits per se. So I'm curious, and I don't like to speak out of turn, but I typically like to facilitate others before I jump in. But for this particular one, I think it's important because I know Ms. Mahaffey and I have been the only two in the last 2 budget cycles that have tried to get this covered publicly stated that we wanted to see this covered for everyone. And so I'm concerned if we start this and let's say our neighboring districts see that, we're no longer covering this and their uses as a recruitment tool, how is this going to, how this is a major loss. And so I would also like to see something differentiated amongst our employees, especially those, maybe beginning teachers or those that are over the range, that 25 range or whatnot. Because a lot of folks depend on these benefits to help them, and so I want to find a way that we can see some other options. Ms. Rice?
I just want to be that third voice with you all of understanding that this is important. The one thing that I can say that matters to me, and I think we had a consensus with the last time, is that we have to take care of the people that are taking care of our children. Anytime we lose sight of that, you cannot run a school district without the people who do it, and our staff is a valuable item to everything that we do, right? So, and making sure that they don't have to stress about certain things so they can focus on our children is very, very important. And anytime we keep taking away from their well-being, we're causing the well-being of our children to be at stake. So I really want us to focus on, I know it's a cost, but if we focus on academics, which means we focus on the people who teach the academics and treat them well, we will reap the benefits of that in a due season.
So Ms. Gordon, followed by Ms. Caulfield and then Dr. E.
Yes, I agree with everything everyone has said, and also to keep in mind that the state health plan moved employees And that is causing a decrease in coverage and an increase in price for medications and all of that. So taking that, and we are now, trying to take away dental benefits. I would also like to see like some sort of sliding scale, particularly for our education support staff. I cannot tell you the amount of people that I've heard from that I personally know who are affected by this, and we are talking about basic necessities of like making sure that we are taking care of ourselves.
Ms. Caulfield?
I guess I'm going to fourth what everybody's saying. And I think you kind of can get like just anything that's hitting the teachers or at the classroom level is really a problem for me. And I think that it is absolutely a loss for our teachers and our staff members when they hear news like that. And we talk about everything we can do to benefit our teachers and retain them and get new teachers on board, and then we come out with news like this. I think we definitely need to have some alternative options. I'm not okay with that happening.
And I do know that if we add this $2.5 million, we do have to reduce something on the
Right.
back end. So it's
Yeah.
not going to be going above and beyond. It's going to be, if we decide as a board to increase this, we know that something else on the back end has to
Right.
be strategically realigned or repurposed. Dr. E?
Just wanted to clarify, employee contributions are for the employee as well as families that they signed up for, or just the employee?
Yeah, so currently, not under a new recommendation, but currently in my current year, an employee contributes $6-7 a month, and then Wake County as the employer contributes $28 a month for the employee. And then that same employee wants to have his or her family covered, the employee picks up the share of that. And that we're not proposing any change to. The change would be to the $28 a month that currently the employer, Wake County Public Schools, is picking up. And just some brief feedback as far as some kind of sliding scale or graduated scale, we can absolutely look at some alternatives for the board to consider.
Because this time last year, Mr. Swanson and I were advocating that we pick up that additional $6-7 for employee contribution. So we're in a different time.
Is there, Ms. Edmonds, did you have, Ms.
I would
Posey?
add for clarity, if we reduce the employer contribution, so we're saying that we can only take effect of this for half the year, their contribution is half that amount versus removing it. So reducing only 2.5 million and not removing the entirety, it's not the full annual 336, it's half that amount.
I understand that we're talking school years versus academic years versus a calendar, but I guess my point in the beginning was you can't come in July and then add benefits. So we're talking about making a decision that might start for half of the next year, but then continues for at least half of the next year. So I understand what you're saying. I'm just recognizing that this is going to be a long-term, an action that has long-term consequences, even though they're not going to be felt until January of next year.
Yes, and that's my half to your point, effectively, if, and we're certainly hearing very loud and clear feedback from board members, but if this were to come about, it would be in there unless the board were to reverse it at some point in the future. Your point.
Thank you, Chair Swanson. I'd like to get a little more of an idea about like what we could be talking about with a sliding scale. So for example, and I just don't know like legally what we can do, but like could we do something where it's provided for all of our wage employees versus salary, or could there be a cutoff, like all employees under, 100,000 or 50,000 or whatever that might be? Is that sort of what we're thinking, or?
That's kind of Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking, but again, we have to see what's legal and ideally,
I think as long as there is
Something else for all of it.
consistency, anything can be defended from a contractual standpoint. And just to point out, and some of the board members may be aware, the state health plan is actually going to a sliding scale as well. So state workers who earn more in compensation, I think it's based upon compensation, will pay a higher monthly premium than employees that make less.
that doesn't make it right.
That does not make it right.
which is out of our control, essentially. It's
Yeah.
the state
But
that's
this part is,
correct, and that's
Yeah.
what I wanted to make germane to, is what we can control.
yeah.
So what we'll do is obviously have multiple options that the board can consider, but we will also identify what are some other things that could replace this particular part if for some reason the board wants to leave this in the budget. So we'll make sure that we do have multiple options as well as replacement options.
Peter, I think you had a follow-up?
I did, thank you. So, kind of hearing all of the concern about this cut around the table, the other thing I wanted to ask about in terms of possibility is, do we have the time that, you could investigate or people could bring to you any alternative providers or see if there's any lower cost alternatives so that we could still offer the same coverage but maybe at a more competitive rate?
That's a great question, and we have looked at that. We've put this contract out on a regular basis, the RFP. We do have, with the current provider that we're under contract with, the potential for a little bit of cost savings while providing the same coverage, but not to the tune of this level. And we believe we're getting a very competitive contract with this. And as Delta, I think, is our current provider.
Thank you.
Any other questions regarding the employee contribution for dental insurance? All right, we'll turn over to our chief of schools.
Good afternoon. Good to be here. This first proposed item to support our efforts on budget realignment falls into the area of chief of schools, and it addresses adjustments to current staffing levels. And included among this are 5 positions that have previously been funded by local resources, and all of these are currently vacant. It includes a removal of the expansion of an area superintendent and the support staff as part of the staffing configuration, senior administrator, special assistant, and administrative assistant position. There was a plan as part of the long-range plan to add another area superintendent, given the number of schools that currently fall in each of the span of control for the area superintendents, but this proposal is going to be removed, and I've stated earlier, it is currently vacant because it was an expansion, no hire has been made. Then in student assignment, there is going to be a removal of a director position that is also vacant. In student assignment, there will also be a shift of a current position off of local funds to a building program. Because the primary focus of work of this particular position is in the building program area, it made sense and was logical to shift this from local funds to a building program funding and make that change. And you'll see in the bottom corner the projected savings or projected cost value for that. The next item I'll call your attention to under the area of chief of schools to support budget realignment is a reduction to supplies and materials in the areas that are highlighted on the slide there. These are all non-personnel adjustments. In the magnet programs, there's a reduction in the non-personnel budget. It's proposed for geospatial, real estate services, and student assignment to be a reduction in supplies and materials as well. Prior and year-end expenditures were analyzed to determine where cost savings could occur, and these reductions were determined based on that analysis. I'll now turn it over to Administrative Services.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you have any questions?
Ms. Rice and then Ms. Edmonds.
I must admit, I need a little bit more clarity on what does supplies and materials look like?
It could be any of their resources, printer costs, it could be paper supplies, it could be resources that they might could secure to distribute to the schools, but it's anything that's non-personnel. And I will turn to my finance people who may have a greater analysis. I think that
It really,
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, and I get the word supplies and materials, but we can use that word, but still need to kind of understand this. I was just trying to understand the scope of it a little bit more, and then determining, is it that you have a certain amount of budget allocated to the school that they will get for their supplies and materials, or are we determining what they can and cannot have? So I'm just trying to,
this typically falls within their realm of their office and their program, and it could be anything from paper supplies to office supplies to printer supplies to resources they may have to support their program development or what have you, but it's...
and if I could clarify, even though it's under the chief of schools, this is not in that 90% of the funding that's going to the schools.
Okay.
It's in the central office shop under the chief of schools.
okay.
Yeah, the instructional supplies is different for the schools versus what you would find in central services.
Okay, I thank you for that. I just needed a little bit more clarity to understand, yes, so that it's not affecting taking of materials that does actually impact learning. That's what I'm trying to make sure I understood.
It's not the school allotments that are in the
Okay.
school's budgets. However, in magnet programs, the central department, as it is for most of us, our work is supporting the schools. So the magnet office could be providing an activity, a professional development activity, and buying supplies where some of the people from schools would be attending that.
Okay.
And it could impact how we're supporting schools. But it's not the resources that magnet transfers to a school budget that the principal is the authority over spending.
Okay, all right, thank you for that.
Ms. Edmonds?
So I wanted to know if this impacts the marketing budget for magnet schools.
It could, because I believe in Magnet, they took a reduction across almost all of their non-personnel accounts, so it's possible.
But if my understanding is correct, Ms. Edmonds, part of the magnet grant requires certain minimum thresholds for that very marketing. Those would absolutely be adhered to.
Okay, can we get more specifics on how this impacts the marketing for magnets, please? Not this minute, but if that needs to be one of my questions, I can email it to you, Ms. Kinsey. That's it.
We got it.
Thank you.
Ms. Caulfield, did you have a question?
No, I was going to actually ask if we can get a list of some of the examples of what it, because it sounds like even if it's at the administration level, it's still going to somehow or another trickle down to impact the classroom.
If you could.
If-
So if you could give us a list of what these things
Give
would
you
be.
some examples. Sure.
Well, as Mr. Nieder said earlier when we began the presentation, we've made the adjustments and the departments are aware of the reductions of the different areas. But in terms of the specific things they are going to be trying to curtail cost or cut, they may not have all those answers at this time. Because we're still working through those specific details of what may have to change and where we can save.
Yeah, I mean, to share one example, the district as a whole, and gets into the complexity of managing a large budget in a complex organization, we're converting to the Infinite Campus Student Information System effective July 1. There are going to be costs associated with that we're still determining. Professional development, training materials, other things. So as we manage a very large budget, but it pales in comparison to what goes to the schools, those are things that could have implications for. We just have fewer resources to support those initiatives that we're still defining.
And to the question about the support of schools, I think in any one of these areas, the individuals trying to decide where those cuts may be are very committed to the support they're funneling to the schools. So it would be very minimal, if all, that what they try to cut from their respective supply budget would impact the schools.
Ms. Gordon, did you have
No, Ms. Rice asked my question back.
any additional questions? Thank you, Chief Garner.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Reader.
Okay, yeah, and administrative services, which encompasses financial services, and under financial services, you've got accounting, finance, accounts payable, treasury, risk management, payroll and benefits, purchasing, the print shop. We've also got Ms. Kimsey's shop of the budget department, and then we've got within Dr. Matillo's the 4 primary pillars under HR. That's administrative services. So we're looking at a reduction in the $600,000 range. One of the recommendations is to take a current senior administrator position for talent acquisition that would have aligned with one of the positions Dr. Gartner mentioned, a 10th area superintendent. And part of our, I hate to call them recommendations, but our willingness to participate would be to eliminate this new talent acquisition position. And then the remainder of it would be a little less than $500,000 in contracted services. And to give a sense of things we're looking at, there's some contracted services we don't really have an option on. Criminal background checks on prospective employees and school volunteers. We really don't have an option on that. We put those contracts out to bid. We believe we're getting competitive pricing. There are other areas, and I'll use an example. For example, we have some large contracts in our purchasing area. One of those contracts is for courier service. We run couriers, both employees, but also we contracted out third parties to run supply runs between the warehouse and schools, and even delivering from school to school. We may have to adjust the frequency of those. We've done that before. And as we continue to shift toward more digital communication, that should have less impact and be much more viable. Those are a couple examples, and we can certainly provide more to you. It may have, we had some plans for some expansion, non-personnel expansion in the services that risk management provided to help ensure an increase in the level of safety of our staff and students. This could hold us back from expanding those sorts of things.
Are there any questions for Mr. Nieder? Ms. Evans?
Do each of the area superintendents have a talent acquisition person?
Let's turn to Dr. Matillo on that.
Yeah, they're not necessarily with the area superintendent, but they all have a region, and we do have a talent acquisition senior admin for each of those regions.
But we don't have 9 regions, or do we?
Yeah.
Are the regions equivalent to the number of area soups that we have?
Correct.
Okay, so that means we have 9 talent acquisition people. Okay. Thank you.
So for clarity for me, to last board member that spoke, are we saying we're removing 9, or we're just removing what school chief of schools just said that they were removing?
Yes.
Correct. We're removing the one that would have aligned with the new area.
So what, in fact, is HR actually removing? If we're removing it just from there, what more are they cutting besides the administrative services piece around contracts? Because considering we have it under here, so it's kind of like we're not double. Am I making sense a little bit? Yes.
Mr. Nieder.
Mr. Nieder, okay, I'm sorry.
Try to take a step back. We have currently 9 area superintendents.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Gartner, please clarify. Each one of them has assigned to him or her probably between 25 or 30 schools that they oversee.
Mm-hmm.
It was the desire to reduce the span of control of the area SUS, because managing 25 to 30 direct reports is really, it's beyond the high end, by adding a 10th area superintendent to further reduce the number of direct reports each have. We had a position created. We also have, because each area SUP has an administrative assistant and a special assistant, so it's really to have a 10th area SUP, the way we're structured, it's a package of 3 positions for 1 area SUP. and some other non-personnel dollars. But part of what we're proposing is, because it hasn't been filled yet, and even though there's a need to, by eliminating it and the 2 associated positions, we cannot impact current staffing levels and still have a reduction in budget. And then, in a separate department in human resources, we also had an additional 10th talent acquisition senior administrator position keyed up to hire. But we're saying if we're not doing this, we're not going to do this. So we'll maintain our alignment with 9 HR talent acquisition senior administrators and 9 area superintendents and 9 special assistants and clerical assistants to those area superintendents. I don't know if that helps.
So thank you for sharing that. I clearly understood that part. That's not my question. My question is, if it's the same position in both schools, chief of schools, and here, where is the...
It's not the same position.
So it's not?
They're separate positions. And they're doing separate functions.
Okay.
The area superintendents and the 2 positions with them, there's 3. For every area, there's 3 positions under chief of schools, and they are working with the principals constantly. The one additional position aligning with that in human resources is working on recruitment for those schools.
Okay.
But that person's here doing HR work,
Okay.
separate from what the area superintendents are doing in those schools. So really, there's a package of 4
Okay.
positions for each area.
So
One
that
in
answers
human
my
resources,
question.
3
Yes,
are
that
in
answers my
chief of
question.
schools.
Yeah, because I'm aware of what our area superintendents do, considering I have 4, but I was trying to make sure that it didn't sound, it sounded like the way it was presented for my hearing, it sounded like we were saying that that area superintendent is in the same boat as the talent acquisition person that you're not hiring for.
And that was not correct.
Okay, all right.
Ms. Caulfield?
I'm not sure if I'm clarifying what you were asking or if it's a whole nother point, but the vacant positions, we're not currently paying out those roles, correct? We're just kind of tidying it up, saying, okay, we're not going to fill it?
We're not going to fill it. We don't require budget to support it.
But these were new, we had just gotten to the point that we'd be able to add this 10th area. So there were, I know many times I tell you there's not money under positions. In this case, there was, because we had just used some savings from previous years that had accumulated in our net savings, and we had transferred dollars to create these 4 positions. And now we're saying we're not going to be able to roll that out with all the other things going on.
Okay.
But it's not taking a job away from anyone because we did not hire them yet. We were getting ready.
Right, we're just not going to utilize it and, okay, zeroing out, basically.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? All right. Guess we can go to academic advancement.
From the Chief Academic Advancement Office, we have 4 things up there for consideration. So the first one is the digital learning coordinators. They have played a critical role in advancing instructional excellence across our district. Their work, co-teaching, modeling best practices, leading professional learning, and integrating digital tools has significantly elevated the quality of instruction in our schools. So just to provide you a deeper understanding, this realignment includes a reduction in the number of DLC positions, which will impact the current support model, which each area of schools have benefit from hands-on dedicated guidance. So to minimize the impact of these reductions, we will implement a multi-tiered support approach that includes utilizing coordinating teachers within departments as digital integration leads. We will rely on school-based instructional facilitators for ongoing coaching and support. We will also leverage the Office of Professional Learning to offer consistent district-wide training opportunities, and we will fully utilize the professional development built into the digital content provider contracts, maintaining a core strategic DLC team to lead key efforts, including the transition to Infinite Campus. In the upcoming weeks, a clear support plan will be developed to outline expectations, access points for digital learning assistance, and communication pathways to ensure schools continue receiving the guidance that they need. Next, we have I want to talk about health services and the 5 vacant certified nursing positions. This realignment includes the removal of these positions that have been proven difficult to fill due to licensing requirements and workforce availability. So to ensure continued student health and safety, we will continue utilizing contracted nursing services to meet daily medical needs across schools. We will explore new recruitment and retention strategies to attract qualified candidates, and we will evaluate workload distribution to maintain compliance with health and care standards. These actions are intended to sustain a stable model of care while positioning the district to rebuild internal capacity over time due to these cuts. Next is supplies and materials. Supplies and materials is just like you've heard with regards to the alignment of what we're doing in the particular areas. To minimize the impact, they are going to prioritize essential purchases to make sure that they are directly aligned with the district's strategic plan and academic priorities. We will also consolidate orders and leverage bulk purchasing where possible to ensure that we stretch our remaining funds. And we're also going to explore alternate funding sources to make sure that we supplement high-need areas. Then the last one that we have up there is going to be the dual settlement for fund realignment. This realignment affects planned investments from the dual settlement, or originally designated to support student wellness, prevention programs, and health education. To address the reduction in available funds, we will collaboratively revise the plan with leaders from academics, counseling, and behavioral health and other departments. We will prioritize initiatives that have the strongest impact and align closely with existing resources. We will also create a revised implementation framework with clearly defined outcomes and measurable goals. And we'll also maintain transparency with the board and the community throughout this process. Where possible, we will pursue external partnerships and grants to support the continuation of key wellness-focused efforts that have been identified. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. So I see Ms. Gordon, Ms. Mahaffey, and
I may have a comment.
a comment already. Ms. Gordon?
You stated that of the 10 coordinator positions that we are removing, the plan is to ask existing coordinators to pick up more work.
Pretty much so. They're going to have to be able to pick up the work in order to provide the support.
I'm getting to a point.
No,
I'm getting
okay.
to a point. So we're asking our staff to do more work while we are taking away benefits.
Yes, ma'am.
And everything is proposed. So again, the board has the discretion to do some strategic realignment, but I will say this again, if we add something, please be mindful that something has to be deducted.
Right.
Ms. Gordon, did you have a follow-up?
Well, my next question is around nurses, the 5 positions. I guess my question is around why has it been hard to, in your opinion, why has it been hard to obtain
Certified nurses
Yes.
in order to do the work? I'm going to
Yes.
defer to Ms. Woodson over there who can answer that question.
So there's a variety of reasons, but certainly since COVID, if you have a nursing license, you can get a job in a hospital or facility making far more money than what we can even begin to pay you.
Traveling.
And they have opportunities to be flexible with schedules and adapt their timing and work environment to what they would prefer to do. Nurses are in high demand at this point in time. We do, our schools do still have nurses in them through our contract with the health department. These nurses were central. We did, oh my goodness, rely on them through the COVID process. They helped us engage and make sure that we had structures in place. We still would love to have those structures here, but we are going to have to really rethink a little bit about what's required. There is also another layer because there is an additional certification that a school nurse needs to receive, which makes this even more challenging, because if you're a nurse and can make much more money in a different environment, and we're going to ask you to get an additional license on top of that, that just is an additional layer for us. We will have to consider what might be some options there.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Looking at Chair Swanson's notes, I think the next question we had was from Ms. Mahaffey.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been helpful if each of these pieces, if we could know where they were on the budget, in the budget book, and also if there was more than 2 pages on strategic budget realignment, given what we're seeing. And that's just a general thing as I try to organize my notes. For the digital learning coordinators, that was something that we had talked about pushing in our initial multi-year plan with the commissioners. I agree with Ms. Gordon's points that she made of, asking people to do more with less. I think that's a theme throughout a lot of this, whether it's a central office department or something that is more in the schools, and we've seen the success of the digital learning coordinators. My question is, are those positions vacant, or are we asking those folks to take a different position as this position gets eliminated?
I'm going to defer to AJ, so he'll be able to respond to that question.
Yeah, right now, 2 of the 10 are vacant, so there would be 8 folks that we would work with to identify other positions in the district.
Okay, and do we think that we can give them similar compensation, or would they be asked to take a position with a lower salary?
Yeah, we can give, they have contracts, so we would make sure that we did identify positions at the same salary.
And Ms. Mahaffey, any of these positions that are under a teacher contract, we have a legal obligation.
Well, yeah, it's the difference of if someone has a 1-year, a 3-year, I think 5-year contract, and what that looks like. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey. I had a question of mine, and then we'll go to Ms. Caulfield. Dr. Robinson, I appreciate your advocacy for these programs, but if you make too strong a case for the value of these recommended cuts, then the board, in defense of these programs, may look for other programs to cut that may or may not have been proposed. And so I just want to make sure that you're aware, these cuts must have been proposed for a reason. I think all of us balk at any of the cuts.
Right.
But if we too strongly defend one of the cuts you're bringing to us as a recommendation, then we may very well go to another cut that you had considered and had not proposed and had evaluated as more essential.
Absolutely.
So I just wanted to provide that feedback. Ms. Caulfield?
I appreciate where it is in the budget. I wasn't sure where to locate that, so that would be helpful, but would you be able to...
Page 134.
134? Thank you.
133 and 134.
Okay. And then if you, would we be able to get some feedback on like a breakdown? Because it looks like there's a lot going on in there. You have 5 vacant positions, 10 coordinators. You said 2 were vacant, but that means that there's still others. Could we get a breakdown on that? And could you clarify a little bit more like what the Jewel piece was?
Do you want me to clarify the Jewel, or do you want Dr. Taylor to clarify? Go ahead.
Well, first, I'm sorry, go for it.
I'm sorry, he was responding to Ms. Caulfield's question about the Jewel
Settlement, and it's the anti-vaping settlement, because there were 2 defendants, Altria and Jewel, and the total settlement over the multi-year period was in the $6 million range. And this recommendation is to take, I believe, $1.7 million out of this. 1.7 out of the $6 million, and use it towards balancing our budget for the coming year. And I believe Clinton did articulate in his comments how we would still focus the efforts of the proceeds of the vast majority of the vaping settlement towards its initial intent, and that would be revising a proposal and bringing it back to the board.
Does that make sense?
I apologize that I had to step out, but with regard to the Jewel settlement, we, as a board, this is a comment, we're very clear of what we wanted that money to go toward. And in conversation with the SHAC, last week, we had our SHAC meeting, the School Health Advisory Committee, for anybody that may not know what that is. We've got real concerns. I joined them as the board liaison in concerns about doing that. So I would want to hear more about taking the majority of 1.7 and keeping that focus on anti-vaping initiatives. That doesn't have to be today, but I'd like to know more about that.
So I can actually answer that question for you. This is actually for the purpose of the upcoming budget year. So one of the things that I was clear is that as we move into future budgets, that 1.7 would be replaced, which is only for a balancing purpose for this year.
Okay.
But we knew where the board was on the vaping settlement, and every indication to me is that the board has not moved away from committing all of those funds for that purpose. So it's just for this year, but all the funds would be available for future use.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor.
Can I follow up on that?
Sure.
How would we look at, because that's kind of forecasting in the future that we would be able to replace $1.7 million with that. So how would we guarantee that we would be able to keep that directed towards the Jewel purpose?
I mean, that is part of what we have to do as we have those future budgets put together, and we're going to obviously have different funding mechanisms that come in. We may get different monies from the state that allow us to put more into fund balances. So that's one thing that will be reserved in the future fund balances, to make sure that that funding is available.
Dr. Robinson, do you want to go to slide 17 and do what's in your office?
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. Greatly appreciate it. So as we go ahead and shift to slide 17, and we can talk about under the Chief of Staff, I want to share with the board exactly how we did this to give you an understanding. Everybody up under my umbrella, we met as a collective group to really talk about how we're going to be able to give back resources to align with the reductions that need to be made. And we focused on three things. We focused on workshop expenses, contracted services, supplies and materials. And what we were able to do during those conversations, everybody up under the particular umbrella that I serve was able to streamline some of the things that they can give back that would not negatively impact their work. And so when you look at the reductions that we've had under this particular department, understand we tightened our belt, but it's not going to reduce our effectiveness or impact on the schools that we serve. So I wanted to make sure that we understood that when we talk about the reduction in the general budget. So it wasn't a situation where I, as the leader of these particular department, expressed to people what they had to give back. We sat down as a collective group in order to make sure that not only can we support each other moving forward, but we can identify the least impact by giving these resources back. And so if you would like for me to go into further detail, I can with that. But we also removed the vacant assistant superintendent position that we had in the particular department. And by doing so, the only thing that we've done and is streamline the work. We will be able to reduce the visibility of that particular role, but at the same time, it's not going to negatively impact the work as we continue to push this work forward throughout the district. And so those are the things that came out of the particular department under my umbrella. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Is there any questions? All right, that means you just did a great job explaining everything.
All right, appreciate you.
We'll go back to slide, I think it's 12, and Mr. Strickland.
In facilities and operations, there were generally two areas where we are able to look at potential budget reductions. If you think through that CNS is an enterprise fund, and for the most part, FD&C is obviously funded by the bond program. So the two main categories were transportation and maintenance and operations. The first two bullet points are for transportation. The first one is a reduction in fuel purchases for next year. We feel real good about this. We have the capacity to handle a large-scale reduction there. And then the second component would be a reduction in contracted services. For the most part, although as Mr. Nieder shared early on, we haven't worked through all the details, this would likely be In this category, a reduction in the parts that we purchase for buses and white fleet vehicles. That's a third-party vendor that does that for us, so we would just likely end up with less inventory throughout the year. The next 4 bullets all reside in maintenance and operations. So in the custodial area, we would look at a reduction to contracted services, to custodial support to schools. Typically, this would mean less detail, less cleaning, less support in extra areas that they may have been receiving in the past. Regional maintenance, energy and physical plant, grounds and maintenance. We would all look to reduce contracted services in those areas. Some of those things, as we work through the details, could mean less frequent waxing of floors. We may not be able to replace flooring as much. We may be looking at hanging on to some carpet for longer periods of time. We may look at less grass cutting. We would likely cut out mulch to schools. We would provide little, if any, support to other schools in other different areas. But those are the 2 main categories that we would end up with. Be glad to answer any questions.
That's great. Chair Harry, and then Ms. Evans.
Thank you. I'm concerned, like everyone is, about all the cuts in all of the departments. But here, I have some very serious concerns. With the exception of Ms. Gordon, who just joined us, everyone else since we've been on the board has known that we have been facing a lot of problems in this area. And we've had other problems in the district too. We found a way to address a lot of them, maybe not fix them, but address them. The problem we were having with our school bus drivers and the vacancies, for example. We made it a priority and we made progress, especially compared to other districts that surround us. We know that for over a year, we've been hearing parents and staff all come to us with questions, with problems about the working conditions and learning conditions in the school. And we've seen case after case of school closings disrupting teachers' work plans and disrupting families and the work plans of those families who might have to take time off, get child care, and it can be destabilizing for the children as well. We had a multi-year plan that was going to slowly address this, as most of you know. It started as a 5-year plan, it turned into an 8-year plan, and now I think they just have the little infinity symbol beside it. We don't have any funding going toward this now. And to even fund what would have been the next step in the plan would have been, I think, ambitious in this kind of budget. I know there's savings to be had in some of these reduction of contract services. And we talked about those, whether the fuel, purchases we've made and other things could really help us. And so, some of these might be appropriate areas for cuts, but I'm worried about cuts that are going to affect our regular maintenance. I don't know if that's in regional maintenance or others. When we had our joint meeting with the county commissioners, one of the top issues that came up was deferred maintenance, and how when we don't have the adequate staffing to take care of the equipment we have, it takes high maintenance costs and it makes them higher maintenance costs just down the road. It's just like paying the minimum balance on your credit card, right? It was an expensive boiler or chiller repair. You didn't make it. You had 3 in the high school, so you had to run the other 2 at 120 or 130% capacity, maybe more, and then they all break down. So, I know we've identified some key areas in the budget so far that I think we heard most everyone around the board say we need to look at and examine. This is one where I would like staff to come back and give us a little bit more information about specifically what's going to be impacted by these cuts. Because anything that is impacting And further deferring maintenance just gets us deeper into a hole. And I'd like to see us find other money to help us get out of that hole. Because if not, this is something that parents and teachers and our staff, our non-teaching staff that work in some of these facilities, Rockaway Road and some others, have all been talking to us about. It's a priority of theirs, and it ought to be a priority of ours. And I'll just leave it at that for now.
So Mr. Chair, and I appreciate those comments, and I think this is spot on point. We know that the transportation is about 1.1, and the custodial is about, I think, 850,000. If we throw the parts in there, so we really are talking about $700,000 in those other pieces. And so what we will do is come back with a granular look at exactly what that is, because most of this is not what I anticipate impacting HVAC type maintenance, but we will come back with a granular look at this, and as in all things, other options for the board that they can look at if this is something you absolutely wanted to leave in with those last 3 bullets, but we'll bring that back.
I appreciate that. And that deeper level will help us have a better idea. Again, we don't want to make any cuts. We know some cuts may have to be made, but that'll help us discern what's really essential. Thank you.
Dr.
Yeah, so in line with that question about the transportation, is reimbursement of parents providing transport, is that part of that too? Or?
No, this is just fuel
It's
costs.
just fuel.
Oh, okay.
You have a follow-up, Dr. Reed? Okay. Ms. Evans?
So I wanted to know about the reduction in contracted services if we were talking about our special education transportation.
No.
Okay, so can you tell me what that piece is? I understand fuel.
The contracted services,
Yes.
so that's by and large will likely be parts. So again, we have a third-party vendor that does our parts for us, and it could mean a reduction of 7 fan belts on the shelf down to 4. And that's really granular, but we would end up stocking less stuff.
Okay. May I make a?
Sure.
So this is a comment. Since my time on the board, even when, Dr. Taylor, your first budget last year, I feel like facilities has taken the brunt of cuts. Last year's budget cycle was not like this one. I recognize that, and I'm grateful for that. But to Chair Haggerty's point, it is very concerning to me. I know we have to find this money somewhere. I understand that. But let's also keep in mind that couple things. Teachers' learning conditions are teachers' working conditions are students' learning conditions. And we are in now, thanks to the General Assembly majority, are in a market competition with charters and voucher schools and all of that. And so all the more reason that we should have really excellent learning spaces. And this is going to impact that. And it's a really terrible position to be in, but I just want to acknowledge that I feel like we keep coming after facilities in one way or the other, and that's not good. Thank you.
Yes. Any other questions? I have one. I was trying to make sure my colleagues didn't have any. Okay, Ms. Hurst?
I did. I'm sorry. I may have possibly zoned out. Can you discuss about the fuel piece?
Sure.
Again, a little bit.
So we're good with this one. So typically, we're able to buy some fuel ahead of time and go ahead and get that on the books based on the funding that we get from the state. And so we're entirely good with this one. This will just be that we won't pre-purchase some fuel and have it on a purchase order, but we'll be fine for next year.
And
if I could perhaps just lend maybe a little more detail. Staff and transportation, they watch the spot markets for futures prices. And when they see an overall dip, if we do have state funding available, and it's been standard practice when those situations occur for years, we'll enter into a contract to pre-purchase millions of gallons of diesel fuel. It's stored for us by a third-party vendor and then delivered as it's needed for use into the future. we were able to do that just in the last couple of months that will extend through this year and possibly even into next year.
And for the sake of time, I'll just concur with Board Member McCaffey around the last three, but particularly the grounds and maintenance of what you're planning on to cut there, because again, working conditions, well-being, and stuff like that. Did I say the wrong person? Oh,
It's okay.
I said it wrong.
That was
Okay, Miss Evans, thank you. Around, I see you're saying the reductive contracted services. So what does that actually look like around coming into the schools? And we could use some beautification as it is already with our schools, and so we're going to reduce that even more. Is that what we're saying?
Yes, that is.
So do we? I'll wait till later to ask the second question.
Ms. Gordon?
I actually have a clarifying question. Does ground maintenance also include like playground?
No.
Okay. What does that fall under?
The playgrounds?
Like, yeah.
To be quite frank, it hasn't been something that we've been able to do a lot with in the last couple of 3 years. I do anticipate some positive news on that in the coming months, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Mr. Strickland, I have a question about the custodial reductions to contract services.
Sure.
If you could explain that. And the reason why I'm concerned about this, because I'm concerned about the health of the schools and those in the building if we're going to be reducing the amount of time things are getting cleaned. So if you could just go into some details about what that means.
And we'll bring additional information as the chair requested at a future meeting, but you're looking probably at things like not waxing the floors as often as we have in the past, reduction in potentially cleaning of high dusting areas where we would typically go through the school and maybe catch things up high or the tops of lockers and things like that. It could potentially mean no power washing at schools. It would definitely mean that when staff are out, for a sick day or something, we would not backfill with a substitute. So those are all extra things that we bake into the contract for additional funds when we do the custodial contracts each year. So we would just cut back on that.
Will that impact some of I know every school has a lead custodial team. Is that going to impact their work?
Typically, that lead is the one person that's there throughout the day. Most of our cleaning takes place at night, so it would typically be on that night crew where we would throttle back some of that work.
And hypothetically, this might fall into Chief Luton's area with community use, but what happens if there's an event that Friday? Will the school not be clean for Monday? Is that going to be
So
impacted?
we haven't gotten into that level of granular detail yet, but we would certainly try to cover anything where we had contracted use of the facility.
It won't be affected.
Okay.
They have to pay for custodial service and community use. So, Chief Strickland, could you share the total amount of custodial contracted services budget? I want to say it's several $1 million.
Well, in terms of our, you mean the amount of the reduction, it would be $850,000.
Yeah, but the total that we put
I looked at that before I came over here for last year. I think it was a little over $45 million for the district.
Ms. Mahaffey, did you have a question?
Yeah, in the same vein as Ms. Gordon's question, the grounds maintenance, I know we don't do much when it comes to athletic facilities, but would that include athletic facilities?
Likely so.
Like line painting and
Well, that's done by the
grass
schools. What little support we do provide now would be maybe some overseeding or fertilizer or something like that, and we would probably pull that back.
So, I mean, it's interesting because as I'm reading this, I feel like I'm going back in a time machine because so many of these things were things that we added back post-recession. And now we're having to use those same cuts because we're not fully back from those recession level cuts. And we'll see a couple other examples like our assistant principal allotment formula. And it's disheartening to see that, education funding is going back to those levels. And if you were, here in 2016, that's kind of what this looks like.
Thank you. Ms. Coffield, and then we'll wrap up this piece, and then I'll encourage folks who do have questions, make sure you get those to Ms. Kimsey before our next work session.
Just like what we were talking about with the academics, it's a pretty big number. We have the 2.7 million. If we could have a breakdown of these, I appreciate the explanation because it kind of gives us like good examples, but the dollar amount, I think it might help us kind of maybe evaluate if some pieces of it is important to.
And we
I
can
mean, 'cause
give
the
you
custodial
those
part could-
initial budgeted dollar amounts that we're looking at. I would say that in practice, as we get into what money funding that we do have, there might be some opportunity for us to, take from here and add there. But
Right.
these are the budget numbers that we're looking at, and we'll get that information.
That'd be helpful, because I think that, considering some of those individual pieces, like when we have our magnet, schools, like some of those schools struggle to kind of get attendance, and we certainly don't want things like this to push that into a further hole. So it might be able to help us break it down a little bit.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Chief Blue?
Superintendent's proposed budget includes removal of a software tool called Let's Talk. Let's Talk is a customer service tool that uses case management behind the scenes to help answer questions from parents or constituents. You can see it because it's the form on all of the district's websites and schools' websites on how to contact the school or the district. It is not to be confused with Talking Points, which is the texting software that schools use. That is not being proposed. That is actually federally funded, so it is still in the budget. This is simply the other tool that will be removed. We will replace it with Google Forms and good old-fashioned telephone calls, which is what we did prior to adopting the software about 5 years ago.
I'm so glad you said that, because that's exactly what I thought it was the texting one.
Yeah, no.
So tell me what are the names again? I can see this.
So the software is called Let's Talk, and it is the form that's on all of the schools' websites if you click the Contact Us button.
Ms. Evans, you have a follow-up?
What's the texting one called?
Oh, that's called Talking Points.
Thank you. Not having kids in the system anymore, I don't use this stuff.
12 texts a day.
No. All right, thank you.
And Talking Points actually allows families to translate it back to whatever language that they're comfortable using, their native language. And so on the teacher perspective, from the teacher end, it's a basic message that says, Mr. Hegarty was not in school today, just bring this to your attention, and then this parent can respond. So it's a way to communicate with them. And so glad to know that that is funded right now, and we will see what that means hopefully in the future. Are there any other questions from Chief Blue?
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Taylor, I think this next slide is yours.
Yes, so this will be a reduction in membership dues. I will not take any reimbursements for travel expenses beyond hotel and registration, and then a general reduction in supplies and materials. Each department we were given a number, and I think the superintendent was like $24,000. So obviously a small budget, but I went as much above that as I could. But it's basically a reduction in membership dues and not taking any reimbursements as superintendent.
Next slide.
And then ultimately the same thing with the Board of Education. Most of that budget is used for things that the board does not have flexibility with. And so we looked at some computer software that we could reduce, as well as reduction in supplies and materials, but just really not a lot of room in that budget beyond most of it is for legal fees and things of that nature.
Took the piece out of it that I was going to say, that our budget looks big because legally that's where the attorneys are housed. And so we can't make additional cuts there, but
I will add that we're obviously watching legal fees, because with a lot of the activity that's been taking place at the federal government, we've had to do a lot more legal work, so we know there was not as much flexibility.
any questions about this one, Chair?
So I don't know what everyone's appetite for it is. And again, it is sort of like a drop in a bucket, but in terms of like shared pain, do we want to consider like reductions in out-of-state travel or similar travel budgets as well?
I think
See what that looks like.
Absolutely.
I guess we would have to follow up with Ms. Allen about that, but I'm in favor of, reducing. I know that we are required to get 12 hours of CLE, and I think the School Boards Association Conference is one option that we can utilize that for, and so...
Some of their meetings are virtual as well.
Yep.
So we'd still have registration fees, but maybe if we could eliminate some of the travel costs.
And the amount of CLEs that we are required to. So if we get our 12 hours, just stick with that and not going above and beyond to also save and model as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good afternoon, Board. On the technology side, we got 4 items. The first item has to do with the Oracle Bridge support. If you remember, last year we discussed about paying Oracle this extra money every year because you were running a out-of-date Oracle software. This is almost last 4 years, we were paying about $250,000 yearly to maintain that out of support. So we have successfully upgraded the Oracle to the latest and greatest, so we don't have to pay that $250. So that's the first cut, right? The second one is basically our MNO staff is using Android phones for the daily job. So we're in the process of moving them to iPhones. We have existing licenses, so we don't have to pay for the Android licenses. So we have about 36,000 savings there. Contracted services, wherever there's an opportunity to renegotiate some of our contracts with our vendors, given our financial situations, and looking at some of the duplicate software, redundant software, we have found certain things to, about $65,000 we're able to save there. The last one is about Sign Up Genius. This is a software which was used during pandemic. It was rarely used last year, so we looked at the utilization. We realized we have other tools, so we can create. It's about $35,000, $3,500, not $35,000. Any questions?
Is there any questions? Ms. Evans?
I wanted to know if the Oracle Bridge support would impact the twice monthly pay.
No, it does not.
Okay.
Yeah, basically what it is, Ms. Edmonds, is because our software, Oracle software was so old, to make sure we have the support from Oracle, we were paying extra money for Oracle to get that. Because now we are operating the vendor-supported version of Oracle, we don't have to pay that anymore.
That's fine. I just thought I had remembered that Oracle was relevant when we switched over to the twice monthly pay for some of our staff, and I just wanted to make sure we were...
No, you're right, because that's my question. I do remember you're informing us that because we were so backdated or using the old version, it would cost so much in the beginning to get us up to date and going from there. So I'm with you on that.
It's just a comment. I wanted to thank you for all the work that you've done for the Oracle migration. As Mr. Nieder could attest, every year in the budget, we would have to set aside so much money just as a contingency for problems with Oracle and the Oracle migration. It's great to see the progress that you've made, so thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
It saves you money.
And now Dr. Gardner, with assistance, will talk about a handful of changes at the school level. And this one the board should be familiar with, having, I think, discussed it at length during your last budget.
That's correct.
So far, the focus of the budget items, as you've seen as part of the proposed budget, have dealt more with the operational central administration pieces. And while I think there's due diligence to look at that as much as can without trying to negatively impact the support that's funneled through the schools, when you hear Dr. Nieder share with us that 90% of the funding goes directly into schools, it's almost inevitable when we're dealing with a budget shortfall of this to have to look at where, if any, items can be looked at the school. And the area superintendents, along before my arrival, area superintendents, along with the partnership of the superintendent's leadership team and finance, have engaged in a lot of conversations, often sometimes painful, about where things could occur without trying to impact teachers and the classroom. So the items that I'm going to kind of review with you now are kind of through that filter of doing everything to protect the teacher and the classroom. as much as possible. This first item, as you recall, as part of previous budgets, it was funded have a permanent substitute in each of our schools for schools to access as needed. This proposed item removes the permanent building substitute, but along with that, you must be aware that there's still a cost associated with this because we have to backfill with regular substitute pay for schools to secure regular subs when needed. It's just that the permanent sub in this particular case of daily presence will be removed. Yes, Ms. Bennett.
So I was so excited that we were able to keep this year and last year, and know that it can be really helpful to our schools. I appreciate the fact that HR is going to work with staff to identify opportunities throughout the district, because our building subs have access to benefits. Our regular subs do not. And so I think for a lot of people, that was the benefit of becoming a building sub. I just hope that HR can come up with a process to meet with our building substitutes to help talk to them, either over the phone, one-on-one, in a group, to figure out what those pieces are.
I think that was done, I know an email had went out, and it was next steps. Dr. Matillo, would you, I don't want to call.
We sent an email out, but we've also contacted building substitutes, and we'll certainly begin to meet with them. We're talking to principals about, what might you have in your building. We've already heard from some principals that already offered a building sub and IA position, so that work is ongoing. We've tried to be real intentional with all of the employee groups to have a contact in HR that they know they can contact and meet with personally, go on virtual meeting, whatever is needed to help support.
Because these next couple of slides really kind of stink, because it does involve people.
Any other questions? The next item you will see is a proposed adjustment to clerical staffing levels. This does not impact your main office staffing at each of the schools. The positions such as lead secretary, your student information data manager, the bookkeeper, the registrar, the receptionist will stay intact. This really deals with the allotment of an additional secretary position that had been given to high schools, of the removal of that. HR is working with those individuals after contacting each principal to identify who that may be or involve, if a school had not already converted it for some other support, to see where they might could fill them into a current vacancy due to retirement or some other position in the schools. There also is a revision in the allotment band for clerical months of employment based on school size at the middle and high schools.
Can you? Yeah. So is that going from like an 12-month to an 11-month employee, or what are we?
I think it deals with based on the size of school. Is that correct?
Yeah. So example at the.
Oh, how many you get based on how
Yes.
many kids are? Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions for this slide?
Okay, the next is an adjustment to Restart allotments. You're familiar with our Restart schools. These are resources that area superintendents use for allotments to go beyond allotment formula, and it is proposed to reduce that funding source from $6 million to $5 million. There was an analysis by the area superintendents that last year $5 million was used primarily for the personnel, so that's where they capped it at $5. The other $1 million tended to be more around supply materials and things like that. They felt if they could keep the $5 to help schools with the staffing that we could do this.
This was to provide like a bridge support versus ripping that Band-Aid off
Yes.
relatively quickly.
Yes. Thank you for pointing this out.
Well, this isn't the bridge support, actually. I think you might be referring to the high schools that we wanted to support. That's different than this.
Gotcha.
But that's actually what my question, Chair Swanson, was, which was, do we have in that bridge program some high schools that would be in Restart that they might be losing some funding on this side, but after moving out of Title I status, they might benefit from some of those bridge funds?
Yes, and it's two different things. So the schools coming out of Title I, the reason we're doing that bridge support is because they would have been losing Title I resources. And that bridge support is backfilling that loss.
Yeah.
This is different. This is our restart schools, and there are times they need things beyond formula for 1 year at a time, and our area superintendents are able to work with them to support those needs. And it might not be the same thing next year that it was this year. So it's a smaller pool of funds they have available, but it's within the amount they use this year to provide additional staffing for those schools.
If I can follow up, though, what I'm curious about is the overlap between the two schools, the two sets of schools.
We can look at that.
Thank you.
We can definitely
So that's a
receive
good
any
question, and I think the
for high
easiest way
schools.
to answer it is, are any high schools restart? I'm not sure.
There are
Okay, how many?
2, I believe.
Okay, would it
I'll
be?
look
I think it's,
Actually, I think it
One or
is
two.
Knightdale.
That's one of the
Ninedale
four.
and Southeast.
I think there's 2.
So probably 2 of the 4 are likely overlaps, but we'll confirm.
Dr. E, and then Ms. Caulfield.
Just to clarify, these restart allotments, are they distributed evenly among the area superintendents? Or is it just kind of as the need exists?
The area superintendents do discuss the requests that they may receive the school, and collectively they look at it, review, and decide. So it may not be the same for each school. It really is driven by need and what the request is, and how that particular staffing request may be used to impact the work they're doing. So it is reviewed by the larger group before it goes for request.
Thank you.
Ms. Caulfield.
Could you give us an example of what are some of the resources that will be lost in the $1 million?
I'll have to turn to, since I've been away from the work for a while, I have to turn to maybe Carrie, somebody who knows what the requests have come in and look like.
It's varying requests, but it could be that a school requested some additional funds for professional development that they were doing that particular year. And we don't know that they would have requested that a year. Typically, these one-time allocations are different based on what's happening each year. It could have been dollars needed to purchase some supplies or particular books or some curriculum. It could be dollars needed to pay some people some additional hours to do work outside their regular day.
Just hit the list.
Okay.
I'll
I think that's-
I know when I was here, a lot with PD and resources they might get in the hands of teachers, like some books around a particular focus area. They were trying to dive in with some fidelity in their area. They would do their own study at the school with the PD, so it was supported that way. Or just like Terry said, to pay for extended, maybe some work they were doing in the summer or something.
Okay.
The scheduling or whatever.
Thank you. So we have been using $5 million, and that's where you went to in general.
So for example, a few years ago, the restart budgets were site-based for each school. And each of our principals and the clerical staff at those schools were having to manage their part of the restart budget. It was very cumbersome and took a lot of time for the schools. So we moved it to centralizing the budget, and we were able at that point to move from probably an $8 million amount of money, and it came down to about $7 million, because if the area superintendents were managing the budget centrally for all the schools, we actually gained there some efficiency. Because when schools were doing it themselves, they were all leaving a little bit on the table in terms of utilization. Whereas now we can strategically target those resources. So dollar value has been coming down because we have all these other significant needs in the system. So this is bringing it pretty tightly to what they really have needed to support additional staffing at the schools. And remember that our area superintendents also have access to targeted assistance dollars for all of our schools that we're hoping we'll be able to appropriate from fund balance this summer for them to have. That's another resource they have to be able to do things beyond formula. And some of those resources they might also give to a restart for school for various reasons. So we try to give the area soups some sources to be able to maneuver for unusual circumstances that we need to.
And with perhaps just a couple exceptions, all of our restart schools also do receive Title I funds above and beyond. And just a clarification, Ms. Caulfield, I believe what Dr. Gartner said was currently they took a look back and $5 million of the $6 million was invested in personnel, and then the remaining $1 million or so on the other things you just heard rattled off. So that was some of the basis for saying, well, we invested $5 million in people and human resources. That was a little bit of the basis behind that.
Which is the desire to maintain as much as possible.
And as a final piece, that the area superintendents will still have the $5 million to do all of the work that they did with the $6 million. So we know the bulk of that was looking at things and not people, but they're still going to have the flexibility to provide some things if necessary. But knowing the bulk of it is any personnel needs that they might need.
And can you remind us of how many schools we have that are restarted that this could be affected by?
40. I think it was 40.
40?
40 more, yes.
Okay.
One out of every 5.
Thank you.
Dr. Ingram, did you have a, no, sorry. We can go to the next.
Okay, thank you. This next proposed item addresses adjustments that are made to the high school assistant principal formula. A lot of effort was taken to examine the formula and the different adjustments that could be made with the least impact, and it came to the factor that here was decided to change the formula by 100 students per tier with the minimal impact possible. So 9 high schools are impacted with the somehow adjustment with the high school formula. Of those 9, 5 are really impacted by this adjustment to the formula. The other 4 really are having an adjustment as a result of anticipated student enrollment changes, which they would have probably changed anyway, but because they do lose the AP, that money comes back. So 5 are affected by this change in formula, by changing it by 100 students per tier. 4 would have been changed anyway with regard to the anticipated student enrollment changes they're probably likely to experience. And Dr. Matillo is working with the principals of these affected schools with regard to identifying who that may be and finding them a position before other vacant assistant principal positions are filled so we can make the placements.
So we'll go Mr. Hershey, Ms. Gordon, and then Ms. Edmonds.
Which schools?
I don't know that I want to name them publicly right now because HR is still working with them to place the individuals and to notify them. But at some point, we can give you the schools once we work through all that, if that is okay.
That was my question.
Okay. Ms. Edmonds.
Same. So today, that's fine, but we would like to know which 9 they are and the division of the 9.
Sure.
What you just described.
Absolutely.
Yep. Thank you.
Do you want to caution when we give, there's an impact because the formula changes, and there's an impact because the number of students at the schools change from year to year.
Right.
So one way to isolate the formula impact would be to look at the projected students for next year for each school, old formula, new formula, and see where just the formula impacts. That may not be the schools that if you look at next year on new formula compared to current year on current formula, which schools are impacted. Because it's both things, the formula changing and the number of students changing at the schools. So we can name the schools, but it can also change again because we're going to reconcile our schools based on their real student counts on day 20 this fall. So just because we can say a name, that doesn't mean it's going to stay at schools. If that makes sense.
Yes, I don't want to limit this piece, but I do know for time purposes, we have a couple more slides and a hard stop at 5. And so if there's any additional questions for this one, please make sure you email those to Ms. Kimsey. And
With respect to your question, we will try to get that information to you as best we can. The next item is a reduction to instructional supplies. While we understand the importance of instructional supplies to the core business that we do, the area superintendents felt that this was one area that we could potentially make adjustment that without hitting the teacher in the classroom. The instructional supply allotment would be from 6572 to 6072. Again, it's a non-personnel focus.
Was that out of the classroom? Was that?
These funds are, even though the supply, it's called an instructional supply allotment or classroom material allotment, it's really the operational budget for a school because the principals are using that for supplies, for copier costs, for cell phones, for professional development, any of the costs they have to run their school. So it's not strictly for supplies.
So given that schools are already short on that, on those dollars, I mean, I assume that covers
Or maybe it doesn't, we heard from librarians, would that pot of money, would that money come out of that
Yeah,
pot?
we don't have a
No.
specific budget for our media centers, nor do we have a specific budget for each grade level or subject area. So the principals do have discretion on how these resources are utilized for the needs at their sites.
Yep.
Ms. Mahaffey?
So is this just the additional funding that comes out of the local budget and not the supplies funding that comes from the state?
It's a combination.
Okay.
It's the total. So this is local and state. We maneuver this money to our local budget to give schools more flexibility in spending and longer time to spend. So we take the state budget for supplies, move it for people, and add it to the local amount, so they get it all in local, but really, kind of half and half.
Okay.
The original source we have from the state.
Okay.
And while this is not a welcomed reduction by any school, it still gives the autonomy to the principals and his or her school leadership team to decide how they're going to break the allotments they do have for the supplies without touching the teacher formula. I mean, that's the main driver that I try to emphasize for the principals. This one is this next one is adjustment to counselor and social worker positions, and I'm fortunate to have members from our student support team here who could really probably share this better than I can. So I'm going to turn, Michelle, would you be willing to explain this? This is really about recouping vacant months, both at the central administration level and the school level, and because of either anticipated vacancies or anticipated retirements or what have you, and changing the formula.
Dr. Pedford is here with me as well. So we were tasked with a reduction of 200 months of employment, which is essentially about 20 positions. We were able to recoup about 10 of those positions at the central services level throughout all of the counseling and student services office. So those are vacant positions that are currently in our counseling and student services office at the central office level. At the school level, we have about an additional 10 positions, and those will be recouped as we receive retirements or resignations from people moving to other places. So we will not be displacing someone who is currently in a position. And that's, I shouldn't say displacing. We're not going to be removing the position from someone who's currently in a position. Did I say that?
And to reaffirm, if there's any school that has one counselor and that person retires or leaves or whatever, that position will be filled. So that wouldn't be part of it. We'll be more capturing the 200 months.
Great. So we'll go Mr. Hershey, Ms. Mahaffey, and then Chair Haggerty.
So I think this builds on what the chair and vice chair respectively said earlier, which is 10 schools are going to be impacted. So are we going to have some schools that are losing like 4 or 5 positions? They're losing a counselor, AP. I mean,
So we've adapted that formula so that our formula for schools will make sure that every school is at a base, that they will have basic number of positions, so that will not.
I understand that, but we still could have, I'm just wondering if we're going to have some schools that are going, he's saying yes, that.
No, yeah.
Yeah, could a school lose an assistant principal a month of employment and be one of the schools that loses a counselor and be one?
That's correct.
Yes.
Okay. I'll save thoughts for later.
Ms. Mahaffey?
In looking at, especially the school-based positions, as you move forward, are you looking at like a more of an acuity model for school counselors, making sure that our schools with the highest needs for those services can be serviced?
We have an amazing team who's been working hard on trying to build that. That is not in place for this next year, but we are wanting to move to that level. You will see that in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Two different questions on this. We've talked before about not having an adequate number of social workers in the district. And we've explored and talked about what it would take to add to that number. But what we came back with was the really brutal truth that before we add positions, we still had a lot of positions that were vacant. And a lot of that has to do with the salary and compensation for these workers. I would love for us to get into a position where, as we are removing positions due to vacancy, rather than that money going into the fund balance, that there is some realignment, and we can revert that into higher salaries for the positions that we're trying to fill, and for those that are still in those jobs. Because we know that we need more and we can't fill the jobs. It's not that we have to, that we have vacancies because they're surplus, or that these are, in excessive positions. They're important positions we can't fill because of salary. And so, understanding that we have to look for areas where we can save money, I'd love to see something like what we were able to do to manage in some of those years under COVID, where we were able to revert those salaries back into the positions and maybe look at offering more competitive salaries so that we don't just keep spiraling with more and more vacancies.
I will say, just as a comment, that we have done better recently than we, specifically around social workers, than we have in quite some time. And thank you for the master's pay. That is a part of what has certainly made a difference with regards to that. And we've also had a provision where we're allowing social workers to be able to count some of their duties towards their licensure. So that has certainly also supported them being willing to be employed by us. But I understand what you're saying and don't disagree.
And I do want to add that we do have the same kind of issue with less people going into the profession. So school psychologists are hard to find. So we did remove a couple of those positions because they've been vacant for a while. Social work, less folks going into that field, and also in school counseling. So we don't have the schools are not producing a lot of folks that can come into those positions as well. It's less about the pay than it is about the
with all due respect, Dr. Pefford, I would challenge you on that just a little bit, because as we teach all of our Wake County students in this new financial literacy class to look at salaries and cost of living, I think, just anecdotally, I've talked to a number of students that would love to go in a profession like that, or just even teaching, but then don't. They make career choices based upon the pay. So they don't pursue an undergraduate or graduate education in social work, because the cost of the education, of obtaining the education, can't be recompensed by the salary that they make. And you do the math, and oftentimes it looks like a debt spiral. So I do wonder if that pay does contribute to the declining number of students in the pipeline. But I know that there's room to disagree on that. The second question that I had is actually, I think, more for Mr. Nieder or Ms. Kimsey. Here, we're looking at adjusting the number of counselors and social workers, and it's under our budget realignment area. But on our program continuity side, we've talked about spending more money to retain behavioral health positions that were ESSER funded. So we have two different sides of the ledger here impacting the number of employees. How does that all reconcile?
That's a great question, and they're connected because they're all looking at these behavioral health support positions serving our students. And I guess I would encourage to kind of get our heads wrapped around it. Look at it as maybe two different buckets. Bucket number one here, we've added all these positions during the pandemic for good reason. In the current year, about a quarter of their support came from remaining federal funds. If we want to continue to maintain those, we've got to identify local funds.
Those people are already on the local budget. The federal money is done and gone.
Right.
But we paid for the first 3 months of this year with that money. So the people are 100% on local or state funds. But this year we paid for 3/4 of them that way because of that first quarter. So we've got to have that extra quarter to keep them.
And then keeping on with sort of the second half, or the second bucket, we're basically saying this is an area, and it's not something we would like to do or want to do, but we're recommending it because none of these decisions are desirable, that in all these behavioral health support positions, regardless of funding source, we want to target taking out existing vacancies and upcoming vacancies to total about 20 positions. So it does impact our capacity to fill these positions and serve our kids. There's no question there.
Thank you.
I just want to clarify that where it says as positions become vacant, they will be removed, that is over and beyond the baseline that you're talking about.
Yes.
So I don't want us or the public to think that if there's no counselor at a specific school, that position is going to be not filled.
The formula is going to drive our work.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
While the board has been committed to its multiple-year plans in various areas over the years, it is a recommended proposal for this year's budget for the extra duty pay scale to remain at the 2024-25 level for the 25-26 year.
I just have one quick question. It's kind of tying back to facilities. Was it facilities? No, I'm sorry. It was some of the digital learning. And you can answer this later if it's something you want to come back to, because I know we're tight on time. But if we're removing some of these positions and sticking it back into some of the schools, is this something that is going to help some of those positions when they have those extra duties to kind of make up for the loss of, I think you said it was 10 coordinator positions that are missing?
I don't know that there is a position or there is an extra duty position on our schedule that would speak directly to that for Ms. Caulfield.
So if I understand this correctly, extra duty is just like coaches and things along those lines.
Department chairs, team leads, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Which would be typical, but now if we're removing 10 positions and we're going to put duties back at the school level, is it something that we could use for this, for them to qualify with this, since we're ridding 10 positions and we're giving somebody extra duty? Like,
I think the
from what you
coordinators
said
were
before, you're
serving
giving
this-
them more.
I'm going to defer to Ms. Kinsey on that.
Those coordinators have been assisting our schools and supporting our schools, but we're not shifting duties to the schools.
Okay.
The jobs are shifting for that position title, and I think the responsibilities are going to be a little bit different, and it's just a shift in the support to our schools.
So we're
I
not
don't think the
adding
intent
more?
is to put more work
Okay.
on the schools.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Your last slide, just sort of summary of today's review and next steps. Again, want to give you the basis of why we're bringing these very difficult recommendations to you. Let you know a little bit more detail, although I think we've clearly heard in some of the areas you would like even more granularity. We'll certainly provide that to you as a board. These recommendations were made with the intent of mitigating the impact on our business, but there is no illusion that they are not impacting our core business. We'll ask you to submit any questions you may have submitted today. I think we took pretty good notes, but if you want to resubmit a question you asked during today's Finance Committee meeting to Terry, please feel free to do so.
And a deadline, when would you like those questions to be?
Let us look at that. We'll send an email out tomorrow because staff will need a few days to kind of work through it, and then we have to submit materials to Ms. Allen the Thursday before the following board meeting. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that.
But don't wait until you have all your questions. If you know some right now, go ahead and send them,
Yeah.
we'll be working on them, and then I can take multiple rounds.
Yeah, and the reason why I said that, because I didn't want to set unrealistic expectations of the question being, someone submits a question on Friday and the board meeting is on Tuesday and that question is not answered. I do not want to put you all in that situation, and also just being realistic that it's going to take some searching to get those answers. So yes.
We'll push an email out to the board tomorrow with that, but thank you.
And so, Mr. Chair, the only thing I'll add is that we've heard all the questions from the board. We will come back with those multiple options of the things that you talked about. We'll also consider additional recommendations that we will present to the board, some other areas that you may decide you want to do instead of what we suggest. And obviously, we don't want you to do this now because it's not time, but also think about or identify other areas that you as board members may want us to examine as well. And so you will collect all this information. I think what I like about this process in terms of what the tightness of this budget is that the board still has ample time to be able to make decisions about what we're going to change. We're certainly going to give our public 4 different occasions to share with us their thoughts on how they feel about this. And through all of this, we will continue to look at additional options for the district if our funding comes in below the $40 million. So there's 9 people in the superintendent. We still have a job to go out and rally for this $40 million. But we appreciate the feedback. I think we all know how very difficult this budget is. But at the end of the day, we're all committed to doing what's best for us. I think that's what our public appreciates most about it.
So we'll have our April 8th work session, followed by the 22nd, and then the 29th Finance Committee meeting, and then that puts us into May, and I think we have that May 6th. And in order to meet that deadline, hopefully we can get a lot of this work done by those upcoming meetings. And we'll also have our first public hearing, public input session on Tuesday's meeting, the 8th, followed by the additional 3 at Abbott Creek Elementary, not Abbott's Elementary, Abbott Creek, Fuquay Farina Middle School, and then the Southeast Raleigh Y. We should hear that date any minute now. So that is that. So again, any questions, please send those to Ms. Kinsey. And thank you all, and I will adjourn this meeting 4 minutes early.
And for everyone that's in here, I have pizza coming in the back for us.